You may be seated. You may be seated. Beloved, this morning, it is my absolute honor, privilege, and everybody okay? All right. All right. It is my absolute honor, privilege, and joy to welcome back to the All Saints pulpit, Chris Yi Suh. Chris is a dear friend of mine. She's been to All Saints before, and we're just overjoyed that she's spending the weekend with us again this morning. Chris, her pronouns are she, they, is a queer diasporic Korean artist, writer, and spiritual care practitioner based in Cleveland, Ohio. Yeah, we can give it up. Somebody likes Cleveland, all right. She's based in Cleveland, Ohio, on the traditional lands of the Erie, Kaskaskia, Mississauga peoples. As an artist and mystic, she believes in the power of creativity and storytelling as a path to cultivating spiritual and social change. As a spiritual director and retreat facilitator, they hold sacred space primarily for women of color, femmes, queer, and gender-expansive folks of color through spiritual accompaniment, healing rituals, and somatic practices. Her hope for the individuals and communities that she works with is to support their ancestral connection, divine agency, and interiority, and assist their healing journey in ways that aid collective liberation. All Saints, please give it up for my dear, dear friend, Chris Yi Suh, everybody.
Thank you. Good morning, church. Good morning. It's been 2 years since I've been here, and it's so good to be with you all. It's doubly meaningful because my parents actually traveled down to be with us this morning, and my imo harmony, my grandmother, is here for the first time watching me preach. And I would love them to stand. 일어설 수 있어, harmony? Please stand. Yeah, I just want to give them honor. Yeah, a lot of honor and love for all they have poured into me. And I would not be without them in my life. And so I already started crying. It's supposed to happen later, once it's more time has passed. But my grandmother would pray for me every single day, not knowing that her granddaughter would eventually go into ministry and eventually become something that was not possible in her generation. Something that was not possible amidst patriarchal, heteronormative barriers. So I honor my grandmother, my imo harmony, my parents, and my older sister, who I won't force her to stand because she'll be really mad at me later. But can we all take a breath together this morning? Take a breath in through your nose and hold, and slowly breathe out. Let's do that one more time. Through your nose, breathe in and hold, and slowly breathe out. People killing, people dying, children hurting, you see them crying. If we practice what we preach, would you turn the other cheek? Mother, 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 help us with some guidance from above. 'Cause people got me questioning, where is the love? The love, the love. Where is the love, the love, the love? The love, the love. Where is the love, the love, the love? Friends, it's Asian Pacific American Heritage Month. The sermon is called Where's the Love? Where's the love? As Asian Pacific American Heritage Month, and as someone who is part of the diaspora, specifically the Korean diaspora, I wanted to come to you this morning with words of celebration and joy, acknowledging the beauty and depth of our cultures and lineages across the diaspora. I wanted to talk to you about the power of representation, of cultivating our own belonging as beloved children of God, and share the powerful ways that we contribute to Asian America. Because for me, for a long time, that's what this month has always been, a joyful and celebratory month for our communities. But this Asian Pacific American Heritage Month, my heart is not in celebration. My heart is in deep grief and deep mourning. Over the last 7 months, we have been bearing witness to genocide backed by US taxpaying dollars unfolding in Palestine. Over 40,000 human beings, innocent civilians, with over 14,000 of them being children, have been killed. This week, we've seen peaceful anti-war student protesters, our youth, 17, 18 years old, across college and university campuses be met with police brutality, and we are bearing witness to mainstream media conflating complex histories, spinning narratives of greater division and confusion, and using tactics to breed fear and hopelessness. As I've been deepening my own political, theological analysis in social consciousness during this time, I'm sitting at the feet of elders and ancestors like Grace Lee Boggs or Yuri Kochiyama, and I can hear their voices echoing in my heart saying, "These are times to grow our souls. These are times to grow our souls, and consciousness is power." In my learning and unlearning, I've begun to see the greater threads of our political, historical interconnectedness as Asians with all oppressed peoples around the world. Viet Thanh Nguyen recently wrote a powerful piece in The Nation titled, "Palestine is in Asia." As Asian Americans, what does it mean for us to have a more expansive solidarity? Lately, I've been recalling stories of what my grandparents endured at the hands of Japanese colonization and imperialism, how their culture and history and language were erased, how they were forcibly removed from their lands and made to take on Japanese names and rescinded of their own mother tongue. I've been recalling how following our liberation from Japanese colonialism, there was no time for celebration, because only a few years after, in 1948, US imperial interests split our country in two, killing and bombing all the uprisers, all the freedom fighters who resisted. On Jeju Island, in response to a group of local activists who opposed these US plans to divide our country, the entire island was indiscriminately bombed and killed, with up to 30,000 civilians massacred under the direction of the US military. And this was 1948, during the same time that the catastrophe, the Nakba, took place in Palestine, where over 780,000 Palestinians were forcibly removed from their homeland for settler colonies to be established under the creation state of Israel. During the Korean War, my elders would share stories of collective trauma as they escaped violence, how they packed up everything in the middle of the night, putting rolled towels over the mouths of children so they would make no sound as they crossed borders, as they crossed oceans to reach safety. They would lament over never being able to see their family members again, never being able to touch our homeland again in Northern Korea. My elders would often call this moment and this time 눈물 바다, which means ocean of tears. Can you all say that with me? 눈물 바다. Maybe place your hands over your heart and feel the pain and the grief and suffering of all the oppressed in the world and in our communities. 눈물 바다, ocean of tears. When I speak of this ocean of grief, it is connected to the psalmist that we just read in Psalm 36 this morning, who is crying out for justice. Grief does not mean that we are hopeless. Grief means that we are in touch with our humanity. Grief does not mean that we are hopeless. Grief means that we are in touch with our humanity. Our country is so full of grief, but it is also so afraid of grief. Kathy Park Hong often talks about our country's amnesic fog, that we have a fog in remembrance and recollection of history. We have a tendency as a people, whom Audre Lorde aptly named citizens of the most powerful country in the world, to forget our own history. And I wonder, is it a forgetfulness or is it an active erasure? The continued struggle as a diasporic Asian in this country is both of invisibility and hyper-visibility, and an urgent call to articulate that we are not a monolith, that Asian American Pacific Islanders represent over a vast diversity of over 45 countries represented in our struggles and in our disparities and in our resistance. And yet the amnesic fog, the national amnesic fog that Hong talks about, is especially relevant in our context today, in this moment of national and global reckoning. Many of us do not know that the term Asian American was formulated in the 1960s, inspired by the Black Power movement, to unite Asian organizers as they fought against US imperialism, genocide, racism, and other state-sanctioned violence. The term was coined at the height of the anti-war movement, as we saw US politics and governmental leaders pouring money into massacring our people in Vietnam and Cambodia and later in the Korean War. It was students, college students, who led us as they became politicized witnesses to the carnage of US intervention in Asia, much like we're seeing today. To identify as Asian American at that time always included a solidarity with the oppressed, a solidarity with the third world peoples, a solidarity with our Black, Indigenous, people of color, with queer and trans communities, with our disabled kin, with the poor, whose struggles are intertwined with our own. It's from this place of consciousness that activist Yuri Kochiyama, in her intersectional allyship, said, "We are all part of one another. We are all part of one another." Can you turn to your neighbor and say, "We are all part of one another"? We are all part of one another. As we look at Psalm 36 this morning, the psalmist who eventually becomes King David is writing this poem. He's not only a child who herds sheep, but is also a child who's an artist and a poet. The poet begins his first stanza by calling out oppressors who are consuming wicked things, who are enacting wicked things, who are plotting, scheming, profiting from, and loving wicked things. Then in verse 5, he calls out to God and says, "Your unfailing love, O Lord, is vast as the heavens. Your faithfulness reaches beyond the clouds. Your righteousness is like the mighty mountains, your justice like the ocean depths." Nungmur pada. He goes on to say in verse 9, "For you are the fountain of life." You are the fountain of life. And I want to stay here briefly for a moment, because it's in this verse in the Gospels that Jesus quotes this passage in verse 9 in John 4:14. As he's speaking with a Samaritan woman who at the time, due to the political, social landscape, religious landscape at the time, was considered inferior and was oppressed. This interaction would have been looked down upon for Jesus, who was a rabbi and considered a religious Jewish elite, but in his exchange with her, Jesus models a deep solidarity and a deep humanity as he shares his message of love with her about eternal life, saying, "Whoever drinks some of the water that I give them will never be thirsty again. But the water that I give them will become a fountain of water springing up to eternal life." After their interaction, the scriptures tell us that she is moved to share this message with those in her community. And Jesus is evoking of Psalm 36, using the words fountain of life in this moment is not simply about a personal conversion or salvation, often indicative of individualistic Western Christianity. Jesus is embodying a salvation that overflows, one that has social, political, collective implications. When we encounter the living Christ who models solidarity and oneness with the oppressed, we experience an unconditional love that overflows into our very being and onto others. It is not a one-time conversion devoid of the collective. It is a love that becomes a fountain overflowing, one that does not stop at us, one that cannot help but spill over like reservoirs into our communities, one that crosses intersectional lines, one that stands in solidarity with the oppressed, with the different, with the other, with a liberating message of love. And this love becomes a liberating cause, a liberating force for justice. My family and I, we currently live in Ohio. Thank you for whoever was excited about that earlier. And this weekend, we are commemorating the 54th anniversary of the Kent State and Jackson State massacres. These events were both anti-war protests due to U.S.'s military involvement in Vietnam and in Cambodia that had taken place among unarmed young people across their campuses. And instead of protecting our young people, our leaders weaponized their peaceful actions, sending in state troopers who ultimately murdered and injured dozens of students. We cannot help but see the parallels today as we watch our leaders enact grave violence and harm on our young people, just 30 minutes away here at UCLA, at Columbia, at Cal Poly Humboldt, at Emory University, among so many others experiencing state-sanctioned police brutality. These brave students are mirroring the multi-faith, intersectional movements across our nation and around the world who are joining arms as Jewish, Muslim, Christian siblings who are standing against anti-Semitism, who are standing against Islamophobia, who are calling an end to this genocide and violence that is being paid for by our tax dollars. The written statements of these students on the campuses evoke the student movements of 1967 that ended the Vietnam War, a war that this church, that All Saints, also famously resisted. They have been evoking student movements of 1985 that ended South African apartheid, another movement that this church, All Saints, famously fought for. These were all critical mass moments and movements that shifted public opinion and enacted foreign policy and change. Our young people mirror David's call as a young person writing Psalm 36. For us as the church, it is our institutional and moral obligation to ask, what is our role in this? Many of us who profess Christ have forgotten the origins of our history and Jesus' genealogy. Jesus was a Palestinian Jew and a refugee who, like Palestinians today, lived under Roman occupation. Reverend Munther Isaac, a Palestinian pastor in Bethlehem, says that if Jesus were alive today, he would be among the 40,000 human beings, innocent civilians, who have been killed. As we see the birthplace of Christ become decimated into ash, we cannot help but see the utter parallels of Palestinians who have been caretakers and protectors of the land where Jesus was born. And the passage in Matthew 25, 35 to 40 comes to mind as we hear Jesus' people cry out, "For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. I needed clothes, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you looked after me. I was in prison, and you came to visit me. Truly, I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me." Many of us watching what's unfolding globally in Palestine, in Sudan, in Congo, in Haiti, have struggled with helplessness and much despair. Many have wondered, I'm only one person. What can I do? But I want to invite you to open your hands. Often I have clenched fists when confronted with feelings of despair and helplessness and powerlessness. Can I ask you all to open your hands like this? Opening our hands is a posture of openness, of receiving, of abundance. In your hands, as you keep them open, acknowledge the grief you are holding today. Again, I'll say grief is not that we are hopeless. Grief does not mean that we are hopeless or weak. Our grief means that we are in touch with our humanity. What is in your hands this morning? What have you brought into this space? What grief have you brought into this space? What grief have you been holding? What is your 눈물 바다, your ocean of tears? And gently close your eyes if you're able. Now imagine the people around you in your community whose grief you are also holding, whose grief that has touched your own, whose grief you are aware of. And imagine that grief sitting in your hands. Imagine now the collective grief and suffering of siblings all across the globe crying out for justice. Imagine their 눈물 바다, their ocean of tears. Now imagine that the fountain of love that Jesus spoke of overflowing, the fountain of life and the fountain of love that is not static, that does not dry out, flowing into your hands. This fountain of life that is boundless, that is limitless, that is growing your capacity, growing your humanity. A fountain of love that is pouring into your hands and spilling over. I want to leave us with a question this morning. And it's the same question that I asked earlier through the song that I sang. But I'd love for you to keep your hands open with your eyes closed to receive this message. People killing, people dying, children hurting, you see them crying. If we practice what we preach, would you turn the other cheek? Mother, 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 help us with some guidance from above. 'Cause people got me questioning, where is the love? The love, the love. Where is the love, the love, the love? Can you sing with me? The love, the love. Where is the love, the love, the love? The love, the love. Where is the love, the love, the love? Thank you so much.